That night, the auction room was filled with the scent of dry hay mingled with damp earth, like the breath of the wilderness trapped behind luxurious leather-clad doors. Walnut chairs were upholstered in gleaming tanned leather, and rows of whiskey glasses sparkled beneath the soft gold of chandelier light. This was no ordinary auction. This was where the elite gathered, renowned horsebreeders, ruthless investors, gentlemen and ladies accustomed to deciding the value of a living being with nothing more than a nod. Whispers, glasses clinking, thick catalogs being flipped through, it all formed a symphony of arrogance and cold precision. But when Ryder stepped through the large mahogany door, all those sounds abruptly fell silent, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. He wore a faded flannel shirt, loosely tucked into a pair of worn-out jeans, red dust from the ranch still clinging to the hem of his leather boots. Salt and pepper hair and beard framed a face with steely gray eyes, the calm of a man who had walked through storms. No expensive watch, no silver-buckled belt, only a solid, unhurried stride, as if he hadn't come to prove anything, but simply to reclaim what was already his. A young man in a Ralph Lauren blazer, sitting cross-legged in the front row, leaned toward his companion and whispered, loud enough for the entire row to hear. "Who let the cowboy out of the museum? Guy looks like he couldn't afford to feed a donkey." Laughter rippled through the room, but Ryder didn't look at them. His eyes were locked on the back of the hall, where Cindar, the purebred black stallion, stood tethered inside a small cedarwood pen. The horse wasn't still. He breathed heavily, stomped his hooves, muscles flexing beneath velvet-like skin, a body forged from power and fire. And his eyes, deep, wild black, met Ryder's gaze dead on. A faint shiver crept down Ryder's spine. No one else in the room understood what he was seeing. But Cindar knew. And so did Ryder. Ryder walked slowly toward the fence where Cindar stood. Each of his steps, though quiet, seemed to tear through the arrogant atmosphere of the room. He didn't hesitate. He wasn't afraid. He didn't care about the mocking eyes boring into his dust-covered back. Only Cindar, the wild flame locked inside a divine form, held his heart's full attention. Ryder's rough fingers gently brushed the weathered wood of the fence. The calluses on his hand bore the marks of time, each raised vein telling a life story forged in silent labor. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, like a gray stone statue in a world gilded in gold. But the silence didn't last long. A large shadow moved into his path. A security guard in a dark blue uniform, with a metal nameplate on his chest and a face as cold as if he'd just stepped out of a military base, blocked the way. "Sir, this is a restricted auction for guests with invitations and verified financial clearance. If you don't have those, we'll have to ask you to leave." The room held its breath again, waiting to see how the cowboy relic would respond. Once more, smirks curled on the lips of the aristocrats. They assumed Ryder would back away, mumble an excuse, or turn around in shame and leave without a word. But he didn't move. He raised his head, his steel gray eyes quietly meeting the guards. Not with anger, not with defiance, just a calm so steady it made the other man swallow reflexively. And then, for the first time, Ryder spoke. His voice was low and hoarse, like cracked earth in a summer drought. "I didn't come here to watch." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I came to buy." All laughter stopped dead. The room fell into a peculiar kind of silence, not one of respect, but of disbelief. A man like him, buy? A man like him, dare? The silence in the room was quickly broken, not by respect, but by a smug chuckle that echoed from the front row. The man was Preston Holloway, known as the Thoroughbred King of Texas. He wore an expensive cowboy hat, a collar embroidered with silver thread, and held a glass of whiskey that swirled like his own pride. Preston turned to the crowd, his lips curling into a smirk full of suggestion. "Come on now, don't be hard on the old man. Maybe he thinks they're auctioning off a pair of used rubber boots." The room erupted in laughter. There were chuckles, shoulder pats, even some pitying looks, but Ryder didn't flinch. He remained exactly where he stood, hand resting on the wooden fence, eyes locked on Cindar, the legendary black stallion quietly watching it all. Cindar didn't neigh, didn't pull at the reins. But those deep, endless eyes, they seemed to understand something. To understand that this man, though outwardly unlike anyone in this room, was the only one not looking at him as a commodity. The security guard, now uneasy as the tension began to spiral, stepped forward halfway. "Sir, we really need you to prove you're qualified to participate in the auction." Ryder slowly turned his head, facing everyone who had just mocked him. His gaze held no anger. It was quiet, unsettlingly so. And then, he spoke, with a calm voice as firm as mountain stone. "That young man over there," he nodded toward Preston, "thinks laughter can buy dignity. But this afternoon, he'll learn, not everyone in rags is poor. And not everyone wearing gold rings knows how to act like a gentleman." No one laughed after that. The room fell utterly silent, because they sensed something money couldn't buy had just entered: dignity. And they also sensed, the real battle hadn't even begun. The heavy wooden gavel in the auctioneer's hand seemed to sense the tension in the room. He adjusted his glasses, glanced at the catalog sheet, then spoke in a solemn tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, the final horse of tonight's auction, and also the most anticipated, Cindar. A direct descendant of a champion bloodline, speed, endurance, and the bearing of a warrior." Immediately, a hand shot up from the front row, $75. Another bidder followed without hesitation, $90. 100,000. Came a voice from the right side of the room, sharp and clean like the cut of a surgical scalpel. The price war began. Each raised hand was a brazen strike in the game of the ultra-wealthy. None of them wanted to lose. And even fewer wanted someone like Ryder to have a seat at their table. But throughout it all, Ryder didn't move. He stood still, silently observing, like a seasoned hunter waiting for the exact moment to pull the trigger. Preston Holloway glanced his way and sneered. "Do something, old man, or are you planning to bid with wartime ration stamps?" A few people chuckled, but there were others whose eyes began to shift. They noticed that Ryder's calm wasn't born of fear, but patience. And then, it happened. The bidding stalled at $120. The room began to hold its breath. The auctioneer scanned the room, waiting for one more raised hand, or to declare it done. Then Ryder spoke, calm, firm, unshaken. 500. The room froze. The auctioneer blinked. "You mean, $500,000? Ryder nodded once, as if he were wagering on a sack of corn, not $500,000. A thick silence fell over the room like a velvet curtain. Those who had mocked him earlier were now stunned. Whiskey glasses trembled in their hands. And Preston had gone pale. No one dared to go higher. Finally, the auctioneer, after scanning every face in the room, tapped the gavel gently on the table. 500.000, going once. 500.000, going twice. 500.000, sold. To Mr. Ryder. The gavel struck like thunder in the heart of summer. But instead of erupting, the room went dead silent. Because they all knew, the game was over. And the winner was the man they had never even bothered to call by name. A soft screech echoed as Preston Holloway shot to his feet, the chair behind him scraping loudly against the polished wooden floor. His face no longer bore the usual sneer, it was tight with the onset of something unfamiliar: fear. A foreign emotion for a man who was used to being in control. All right. Preston broke the tense silence with a forced laugh, waving his hands as if to reclaim authority. "It's all a joke, right? No way this guy has $500,000. A few people chuckled out of habit. But the laughter was thin this time, as if even they were no longer sure of what they believed. The auctioneer frowned, maintaining strict professionalism. As per protocol, all transactions must be confirmed on site. "Mr. Ryder, please present your financial verification." Ryder said nothing. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his faded flannel coat. No rush, no tremble. He pulled out a folded bank check, creased with age, but the ink still sharp. Ryder flattened it, then extended it forward as though offering a treasure map. The auctioneer took it. His eyes skimmed the paper, and then stopped. The change in his face was visible. The initial skepticism vanished like morning fog under sunlight. In its place, astonishment, and then, respect. "The check is valid," he announced, voice slightly shaken but resolute. "Funds verified. Transaction complete." Silence. No applause. No whistles. Only hundreds of eyes, those same eyes that once scorned, now gazing at Ryder as if they were seeing A legend step out of a book they had never bothered to read. The name, Ryder, spread through the room like wildfire across dry grass. He wasn't just a stranger. Who was he? Why did he carry a $500,000 check in a jacket covered in dust? Why did he choose Cindar, a horse everyone wanted, without wearing a suit or a watch? There were no answers yet. But Preston Holloway, he knew. When Ryder's eyes met his, not with defiance, not with triumph, but with a bitter understanding, Preston understood. He knew Ryder wasn't just a buyer. He was a living reminder that true class never needs to be proven by clothes or fame, but by courage in the moment when everything stands against you. When the wooden gavel struck for the final time, the sound, thud, rang out like a gunshot, announcing a shift in the balance of power in that gold-trimmed room. $500,000, transaction complete. The new owner of Cindar, Mr. Ryder. The auctioneer's confirmation echoed like a funeral bell tolling for the pride of an entire gathering. Ryder, the man in a tattered flannel shirt and boots dusted red from the ranch, hadn't just won. He had silenced the room with the weight of quiet dignity. The eyes that once laughed now fell silent. The hands that once lifted whiskey glasses now clutched the armrests in tight fists. And at the front row, Preston Holloway sat like a man stripped of his armor in the middle of a battlefield. No one laughed anymore. No one dared to smirk. Only Ryder remained, calm, his hand resting gently on the wooden rail behind which Cindar stood, as if everything was only just beginning. Preston rose again, but this time not to mock. His fists clenched, his face flushed red. "Don't think you can just walk in here, throw out $500,000, and leave like you're somebody," he growled. Though the growl held no power, only a wounded pride poorly concealed behind arrogance. Ryder turned to him. His granite gray eyes met Preston's, not with anger, not with disdain, but with the silent understanding of a man who had walked through shadows darker than any room Preston had ever occupied. He spoke, his voice rough like dust blown across time. "I don't need to prove who I am, because I've never forgotten who I am." The room felt like it had been drained of air. There was something in those words, something raw and undeniable, that made even the wealthiest men lower their gaze. A naked truth, impossible to ignore. Ryder wasn't a drifter. He was a living emblem of resilience, of authenticity in a place drowning in pretense. And now, something else became clear to everyone. Ryder hadn't come to buy a horse. He had come to reclaim what was rightfully his, long overdue. And Cindar, the wild-blooded, untamed stallion, when he looked at Ryder, did not retreat or throw his head. He simply bowed it, ever so slightly, in a gesture of quiet recognition. Between those two weathered souls, no words were needed. They had known each other, long before this room ever dared to laugh. The air inside the auction hall grew thick, choked by all the things left unsaid. In that prolonged silence, every eye slowly shifted, not to Ryder anymore, but to Cindar. The jet-black stallion, tall and gleaming like a bronze statue, was once infamous for allowing no one near him. A warhorse that had thrown off trainers, that nearly shattered a Kentucky rider's ribs. Everyone knew. Cindar was a force of wild wind, untamable by any hand. And yet, here and now, under the gaze of hundreds, Cindar did not stomp, did not roar, did not toss his mane in defiance. He walked, slowly, toward Ryder. Each step sent a pulse through the hearts of those watching. Those who once believed they could own Cindar with money now understood. Money cannot buy the respect of a wild soul. Ryder didn't move. He stood still, letting the breeze ruffle his silvered hair and the worn-out flannel on his shoulders. And when Cindar reached him, towering, rippling with strength, there was no dramatic movement. None was needed. The stallion lowered his head and pressed the solid plane of his forehead against Ryder's chest, like an ancient rite between two warriors without vows. A nod, a greeting, a recognition. The room exploded in silence. Someone quietly set their glass down on the table. Someone else rose from their seat, face pale, not knowing whether it was awe or emotion that gripped them. Preston Holloway, the man who once ruled this arena, could only stare, as if witnessing something that shattered the very rules of the game he once wrote. Ryder gently stroked the bridge of Cindar's nose. His fingers didn't tremble, though it was the first time he had ever touched the beast. No whip, no bridle, No show of power. Only the truth. How long have you waited for me, old friend? Ryder whispered. Words meant for no one else in that room but the horse before him. Cindar snorted gently, breathing out a warm gust of air into the cold silence. They didn't need to say anything more. Because sometimes, recognition doesn't come from applause. It comes from the nod of a wild soul. The shockwave spread through the auction hall like a silent storm, no shouting. No outcry, yet everyone could feel it. No one moved, no one spoke, only cautious eyes turned toward Ryder and Cindar, as if witnessing something legendary. At that moment, Preston Holloway's voice rang out, sharp, but less confident than usual. We can't just rely on some touching performance. Without proof, there's no confirmed transaction. This man is still an unknown. His voice was hoarse. He needed something, anything, to pull the control back into his hands. The auctioneer, a refined gentleman who had presided over hundreds of high-stakes sales, could not hide his unease. He tapped his gavel lightly, trying to restore professional order. Mr. Ryder, we require financial confirmation. Standard protocol demands either documentation or immediate wire authorization. In stark contrast to the tension strung tight across the room, Ryder simply nodded, as if he had foreseen it all. He reached inside his flannel shirt, frayed at the shoulders, the breast pocket worn thin by years of dry summers and silent winters. His fingers drew out a carefully folded slip of paper. A bank check, its crease still fresh. But the name on the signature line, a name every person in the industry had once known. A name believed to have vanished from the commercial world. The auctioneer's hand trembled slightly as he unfolded it. Then silence. Then a long breath escaped his lips. The amount is valid. Bank verified. No issues whatsoever, he declared, his voice no longer bound by duty, but as if confirming to himself that what he held was, indeed, real. In that moment, everything once said about Ryder, the sneers, the mocking laughter, the judgments stitched into designer suits, felt laughable. Because the money was real. And no one could argue with a $500 check, except perhaps the worth of the man who carried it. Preston Holloway's fists clenched, his jaw twitched. There was no retreat now. The man he thought a wandering stray had just bought the most expensive horse of the night, with a single bid. One bid. No haggling. No justification. Just, the right man. And then, Ryder turned, walking toward Cindar who stood waiting. No boastful words. No vengeful glare. Only steady footsteps, as if the earth beneath him had known him long before this night. And within the hearts of everyone present, a silent question began to rise. How many times in our lives have we misjudged a man like that? The auction hall was no longer a place for laughter or arrogant toasts. After Ryder confirmed the $500,000 sum with a legitimate bank check, the entire space fell into a state of acceptance. No one joked anymore. No one even dared to chuckle. And in that moment, they witnessed the most unforgettable scene of the night, a moment that no money could buy. Ryder walked slowly toward the exhibition stall, where Cindar stood, the proud black stallion, a creature seemingly forged from darkness itself, turned its head, its wild eyes still untamed. It had been so fierce that no one dared come close. Even the stable manager used only a whip and a long rope to handle it from afar. But when Ryder approached, he brought no whip. It was just him, his calloused hands, his unshaken steps, carrying no trace of dominance. Cindar tossed its head, hoof striking the wooden floor in cautious warning. Perhaps it thought this was just another man coming to assess, to tame, to demand submission to that gilded world. But Ryder did nothing. He stood a few steps away, not rushing, not imposing. He let time pass, letting the air between him and Cindar condense into understanding. A deep exhale came from Cindar's chest. It took a step forward. One step. Ryder extended his hand, steady. And then, before the stunned eyes of dozens of investors, businessmen, and the most powerful figures in the thoroughbred world, Cindar lowered its head, and gently touched Ryder's outstretched palm. The room fell utterly silent. No whispers. No one dared breathe too hard. Because everyone realized, the most important event of the night wasn't the $500 bid. It was that nod. A wild, unbreakable warhorse had chosen its master. Not because of money. Not because of a grand stable or modern training grounds. But because of instinct, a bond only those who live true to the land, the wind, and animals can ever possess. Preston Holloway stood frozen, not because he had lost, but because, for the first time, he had witnessed something far beyond the kind of power money could buy. No one could question it anymore. Cindar had chosen, and Ryder, the man once mocked for his faded flannel shirt, had become the rightful master of the most magnificent creature in that historic auction. After the miraculous moment between Ryder and Cindar, the auction hall seemed to lose all of its usual arrogance. No one spoke. No one offered congratulations. No one dared approach the man they had just laughed at minutes ago. But Ryder needed no applause. He needed only one thing: silence. Because in silence, truth reveals itself more clearly than any round of applause ever could. At the end of the front row, Preston Holloway remained seated, his body leaning forward, hands gripping the armrest, pale white. He couldn't accept it. He refused to. An old rancher with a rusty pickup truck had just walked into his world, defied its unspoken rules, and won, in front of everyone. He shot to his feet, eyes burning with shame and disbelief. "Wait," Preston barked, his voice no longer that of the powerful, but of a man on the brink of losing everything. "This man doesn't belong here. Who even is he? Some kind of hidden legend?" Ryder didn't answer right away. He simply turned around, standing beneath the overhead lights like an old oak tree weathering a storm. Then he took a step forward. His voice was deep and calm. Not angry, not proud, just truth. Stripped bare. "My name is Ryder. I didn't come here to play games. I came because I once trained the ancestors of Cindar, in a valley none of you would even know exists on your maps." Preston froze. Ryder continued, his smoke-gray eyes locking onto his challenger. "I was betrayed. I was pushed off my own land by men like you. Men who thought signatures in air-conditioned offices meant more than sweat spilled under the open sky. But I didn't come here for revenge." He paused. "I came to bring a warrior home." A quiet ripple spread through the hall. But this time, the murmurs weren't mockery. They were questions, urgent whispers seeking truth. "Who is he, really? Did you hear about a Ryder who saved a top breeding ranch in Texas back in '89? No. I heard he used to live in seclusion on the Wyoming plains, taming wild horses with nothing but his hands. His name, long buried by time, was now rising again, like ashes catching wind. And Preston, the man who once ruled auctions like a king, stood there now. Stripped of sharp comebacks, robbed of sly smiles, forgotten, in the very arena he once dominated. And Ryder? He simply tipped his hat, then turned and walked away with Cindar at his side, leaving behind a hall heavy with unspoken awe, and a world just beginning to understand. Some men don't need to speak much, because legends don't shout. They let their actions write the story. No one dared stop Ryder as he walked toward the exit. Cindar strode beside him, its black mane flaring like a proud flame in the wind. Its gaze was no longer wild, but calm, as if the beast itself knew it had been chosen by the right man. Outside, night had fallen. A gentle breeze swept across the cold, affluent land, carrying the last echoes of the auction hall. Whispers, scraping chairs, stifled breaths. Ryder reached his old pickup truck, weathered bronze, rust-bitten, the rearview mirror scratched, the truck bed scarred by time. But everything still worked, and more importantly, it always got him home. He opened the horse trailer. Cindar, as if it had belonged there all along, climbed in without a tug or command. No snort, no hesitation. A warrior had found his comrade. Behind them, footsteps rang out, hurried, clumsy, clinging to the remnants of dignity. Preston Holloway. There was no crowd now. No laughter trailing him. Only a man walking toward the silence of defeat. Ryder? The name slipped out like an apology only half formed. Ryder paused, hand resting on the truck bed, but didn't turn around. Preston swallowed hard. "I didn't know who you were before." "Doesn't matter," Ryder replied, voice low and steady. "Because after tonight, the door you once shut in my face will never open for you again." Preston's brow furrowed, trying to hold on to the last shred of pride. "You think one big win means you've reclaimed everything?" This time, Ryder turned. His eyes held no anger, just a silence so profound it felt like the stillness after a storm. "I didn't reclaim anything. I simply brought home what was always mine." A cold stillness drifted between them. Ryder reached up and touched a scratch on the hood, one he'd made himself long ago, during a storm crossing in Arizona. Every scar, every worn corner bore witness to something Preston would never understand. True worth never comes with a price tag. Without waiting for a farewell, Ryder climbed into the truck. The headlights came on. Behind him, Cindar breathed steadily, like a wild soul finally unchained. The truck pulled away from the auction grounds and disappeared into the night. No honking, no cheering, only a straight road ahead, and a man who no longer needed recognition. And behind him stood Preston, alone, frozen like stone, before the doors of a hall he once ruled, now closed to him forever. Dawn had yet to break when Ryder returned to the ranch. Above the western sky, the last streaks of starlight faded into the silver-gray glow of early morning. The sound of his tires crunching slowly over the gravel road echoed like a steady heartbeat, slow. Sure, with nothing left to prove to the world. Cindar didn't neigh, didn't kick, didn't stir in the trailer. Like Ryder, the stallion didn't need applause or a spotlight to know it had already won. The ranch sat nestled between two low hills, surrounded by open grassland that stretched farther than the eye could see. No electric fences, no automatic gates, just an old wooden arch carved faintly with the words, "The Hollow Grace." Named after Ryder's mother, the woman who first taught him about patience and honor. Caleb, the young ranch hand who'd worked beside Ryder for 10 years, stood at the stable, coffee steaming in his hand. He spotted the truck from afar, abandoned his cup, and hurried forward. "No way, you really did it." His voice caught as Cindar stepped from the trailer, majestic, towering, like a legend returning from war. Ryder said nothing. He simply walked up, unlatched the strap, and ran a hand along the stallion's neck. Cindar lowered his head and gently nudged Ryder's shoulder, as if to say, "We've found each other, at last." Caleb shook his head, still in disbelief. "Whole state's talking about you. They say, you shut up every rich man in that room." Preston Holloway. Preston's yesterday. Ryder cut in softly, like wind brushing wheat. Today, we clear the backfield, refill the watering troughs, and get the east pasture ready. Caleb laughed, a real, grateful kind of laugh, because he understood. The truly great don't chase legacy. They return to simplicity. Quietly, steadily, Cindar galloped across the open field, mane flying like a black ribbon drawn by the wind. No more steel cages, no more calculating stares, only freedom, the one language both he and Ryder understood. Ryder stood by the wooden fence, wide brim hat shading his eyes from the morning light. He wasn't looking back. He wasn't thinking of auctions or battles won. His heart was here, where red soil clung to worn boots, where rough hands met coarse manes, where every sunrise whispered, "Live as you truly are." Caleb stepped beside him, silent for a moment. "There'll be others next year. Could be Holloway, could be someone new." "Maybe," Ryder said, eyes still tracking Cindar's circling figure. "You afraid?" Ryder turned, the silver in his eyes curling into a deep, knowing smile. "When you've got nothing left to prove, you know what you're left with?" Caleb shook his head. Ryder replied quietly, "Freedom, and once you have that, no one can take it from you ever again." The wind swept across the plains, carrying hoofbeats and the smell of damp earth, like the land itself exhaling. And in that moment, the entire world seemed to fall still, to make room for a man and his horse. Souls once overlooked, now legends, in the only place that ever truly mattered, the home they called freedom. If you've made it to the end of this story, then maybe, somewhere deep inside, you too have known what it feels like to be underestimated. To walk into a room where every glance holds doubt, every nod is loaded with judgment, every smile hides a smirk. But Ryder, a man with calloused hands and a weathered hat, proved that real worth doesn't wear a name tag, doesn't shine through a tailored suit, and doesn't need an introduction. True value is silent, but it always finds a way to silence the entire room. In Cindar, the stallion once imprisoned by bloodlines and price tags, finally found someone who didn't try to own him for legacy, but chose him for something far more sacred. A bond. You may not have $500,000 to make a room fall silent, but maybe you have a heart resilient enough to stay, even when rejected. A spirit quiet enough to wait for the right moment to speak. And a soul certain enough to know. You didn't come to be accepted. You came because this is where you belong. If this story touched something in you, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder. Sometimes, it's not your victory that stuns the world, but how quietly, how defiantly, you earned it. Thank you for listening.